Yeah, it was the theme of my swimming career from like the age of 12 till 16 because of the region I was from. There was a guy, exact same name, same spelling, the whole thing. And he was about 12 to 14 years, I think, my senior. And he'd been to the 1992 Barcelona Olympic Games. And so to put that into perspective, he was in 1992, he was the same age that I was when I came to the US in 2005, so there's a good 13-year age gap. And he was on the tail end of his career right as I was taking off. And believe it or not, at some of these regional competitions in the northwest of England, we were finalists, first and second seed into the final. It was literally lane 4, Steve Mellor. Lane 5, Steve Mellor.
We would like to thank our title sponsor, B1 Bank. B1 Bank knows that entrepreneurs like you are always thinking one step ahead. So you need banking solutions that can keep up. It begins with lending. Does your business need working capital or financing for new equipment? How about a real estate or a construction loan? Good news, the B1 lending team is ready to learn your goals and help you find the best lending option available. Now let's talk about uncomplicating your daily cash flow. B1 offers a full array of treasury management services that let you collect funds faster, pay funds more efficiently, and access your information with powerful online tools. Most importantly, B1 understands the value of working with local nonprofits to build a stronger community. They believe in giving back through hands-on involvement with their B1 Community Outreach Program because it's simply the right thing to do. B1 Bank. Be uncomplicated. To learn more, visit b1bank.com. Equal housing lender, member FDIC. Hello, I'm Andrew McClendon, your host of the Next Entrepreneur Podcast. We're here today in the Propel Production Podcast Studio in Baton Rouge, and we welcome our guest, Mr. Steve Mellor, host of the Career Competitor Podcast, which is also the name of your business, right? The Career Competitor LLC, where you're a high performance and leadership coach. So we got two main things going on here that we want to talk about. So welcome. Let me ask you to start by telling us about your podcast.
Yeah, firstly, Andrew, I just appreciate the opportunity. I've seen some of your former guests. I know a couple of them, and I just love the work that you're doing. So I'm very humbled to be on here. And
thank you. I appreciate that.
In terms of the podcast, it has been, firstly, as you'll probably know, it's a labor of love to begin with.
Right, right.
It's hard work. It's hard work, but it was born out of, for me, something that was always a passion back when I was a swim coach, which was that of trying to help athletes see that even when their athletic career is over, they have so much that they've taken from that journey that they can apply now in whatever their next chapter is going to be in life. And so Career Competitor was born out of this idea of having former athletes come on and talk about where they were in life and how they were taking those same qualities that made them such great athletes in whatever their respective sport was, and how they're applying it now in ways that is leading to the success in their respective careers. And that's where it started. This was back in the summer of 2018. And over time, it just organically grew into competitors across a variety of fields that didn't necessarily have sports backgrounds coming on and sharing their stories, and me being able to pull from what it was they brought to the show. And it was something I've really enjoyed being able to do, is taking these very specific concepts and examples from certain people's journeys and trying to turn them into something for listeners where they can say, hey, I can relate to that. And if that's all I can do, maybe once every single episode, and everyone takes away one thing, then I think it's a pretty effective podcast. So it's been good to me, man. I've
it's very cool. And, the depth and breadth of the guests that you've had and their stories is very impressive. But what I have found really intriguing is how your podcasts led to the start of your business. And walk us through that, because you learn from these guests. Walk us through that.
Yeah. It was probably after about 2 years. So right as we came through COVID, which was a very busy time for podcasters everywhere. As we came through COVID and I came out the back of that, the listenership with my show had started to increase, and I started to now engage in interviews with people that were very well established business people, executives, etc. And we would have these interviews for 30, 45 minutes, and we'd finish the interview, and they'd look at me after we'd done recording and say, is this what you do? And I'm like, well, no, I'm not a professional podcaster because there's not a lot of money in that. And they would say, well, surely you do something along these lines for a job. And I'm like, well, I'm a swim coach. It has nothing to do with what I'm doing. And then they would just give me these compliments of, listen, you have this heightened awareness, this perspective, if you will, for hearing these individual stories and being able to turn it around and make it something that people can kind of digest no matter what their background may be. So just very highly perceptive in that regard. And these compliments kind of kept coming for like a year. And here I was, ironically, having as much success in my day job as a swim coach during that time, while I had this festering thing in the back of my mind of like, what do I do with these compliments? Like, where I feel this need to do something, and I couldn't put my finger on what it would be. And eventually I came to the realization, and I'm sure we'll get to how more I really crystallized that realization. But at the end of the day, I came to that realization in the fall of 2021 that it was time to take these compliments, bet on myself, start a business based on high performance and leadership coaching, and just kind of see where it went.
Yeah. So you've got the story we're going to get into about Brooks Curry, who you had coached to an Olympic position. It's interesting because when you're following up on these compliments and you're looking at what your potential was to do this, what it became was your potential lied in you finding the potentials in others. And that became the start of your business, right? Which is a Career Competitor LLC.
That's it. And it took me a while to get there. It's always taken me a while to get there, I guess, in life. But the thing was that I didn't know it at the time, but I was identifying potential in individuals, and I was trying to get it across to listeners like, listen, you may very well have this same potential, but for whatever reason, you've yet to identify it. And I'm hopefully helping you get there a little quicker than maybe I myself did.
Yeah. And we should mention that you're also author of a new book, Shock the World, which we're going to get into it. It's a fantastic book.
Appreciate that.
And I enjoyed reading, and I loved how you were able to integrate throughout the book stories of people that you had interviewed on your podcast, which really brought light and color to each of the chapters. So let's talk about who you serve in your business.
Sure. A lot of my business right now is business owners and executive teams. And so as much as I qualify myself as this high performance and leadership coach, at the heart of it is executive coaching. And the beauty of that is that I have two different directions that I can go with the people that I work with. I can keep it strictly one-on-one, just working on a specific individual need to realize their potential, as we've been talking about. And I usually go about that just by having a discussion about where they are and where they would rather be, and we coach to that gap. And that's a big part of my business is identify the gap and let's coach the gap. Let's not coach where you are. Let's not coach where you want to get to. Let's coach the gap, because that's the process, right? Yeah, so that for me is the one-on-one stuff. Obviously I love that, and it is right now the heart of my business. And I'm slowly now, only a year or so into my business, but I'm now working with entire executive teams and hoping to start work with businesses as a whole on what it means to maybe look at the gaps in their business and say, listen, you can be satisfied with where you are, but you can still have that ambition for where you want to get to. And I love inserting myself into that gap and jumping in there and swimming around in it. Pardon the pun. But yeah, for me, like that is really how I like to describe what I do now is let's identify the gap and let's get in there and coach the gap.
Yeah, that's very cool. So let's dial it back and go to the start of your journey. You grew up in England?
Correct.
So paint a picture for what your early life in England looked like.
Yeah, for me, it was what I would like to assume the typical upbringing for a child would be, and it's that of play. That was like the theme of my childhood was play.
Man, that sounds healthy.
Right. So it was whether I was playing sport, whether I was even on a theater stage. I actually did a bunch of acting through most of my teen years. Believe it or not, I was always performing. Never shy. Never ever shy. That was one thing I would never get qualified for being. And for me, what I liked about that is through play you can have imagination, right? And that's the beauty of what I look back on my childhood now, is it allowed me to kind of dream a little bit and have these ideas and thoughts of what could life look like if I were to be the best at this? What could life be like if I were to cross the finish line first? And
now, did you have a mentor that led those thoughts, like that someone that you look up to that had success in a?
You know what? I had someone who was encouraging me, and that, and my father. Like my dad was very encouraging, and the irony of that was that he was encouraging me from a place of the fact that he wasn't living that life.
Right.
You know, he was doing the 9 to 5.
Right.
You know, and I think he was even looking back on his own childhood and wishing that he'd had those same opportunities.
Yeah.
And I was never met with resistance when I prioritized play, ever. I didn't fail out of school, just to be clear, but at the same time, I was encouraged to play, you know, and that encouragement to play allowed me to be encouraged towards dreaming, towards my imagination, but it also just encouraged me to go for, hey, you know, what is it that's out there that none of us have contemplated? And maybe you should just consider going for that.
Yeah, maybe the greatest gift your father could ever give you is celebrating that.
Yeah.
And maybe that's not something he was able to do. And
it's 100%. And what's funny is when I actually got to the US back in 2005, it was only then that I realized that he and I had conversations about me one day swimming at an American university and being given a scholarship and having the freedom to do sport and go to school at the same time. And I hadn't even recalled that until I was actually living it. And I'm like, man, we were having those conversations.
That's
like,
unbelievable. So you did swim in England.
I did, yeah. So
and to walk us through that. I mean, you earned a scholarship, so you achieved a great level of success for a university want to pull you across the pond, right?
Right. And for me, swimming became my be-all, end-all around 12, 13 years of age. And I tell a story a lot when I do some speaking engagements and things like that, but I'll tell you the very short version here is that around 12 years old, my dad let me know that I sucked at soccer, you know. And so for me, as an English kid at 12 years old, it's not great news. But you know, you take the punch on the chin, and the beauty of that was he cushioned the blow by letting me know that, listen, you could have something here with this swimming thing. And so anyway, swimming became my be-all, end-all around 12, 13 years of age, and I made my first British senior team, when I was 18 years old. Swam full-time within the British setup for 2 years, from 2003 to 2005, and then actually came over as a very old freshman at 20 years of age in 2005 to North Carolina State University.
And your scholarship there. Was that a big transition from your life back home?
Yes. About the third week, I called home questioning whether or not I should be there. Yeah. I didn't know what it meant to be homesick. And then suddenly it just completely took over me about 3 weeks into my time at college. And that was hard. But gosh, I am so thankful. Again, like I've already given a couple of examples, the role my dad, but this time both my parents played, and just saying, like, listen, just stick it out. Stick it out. Give it a chance. Yeah.
I guess the good thing is with swimming, you're in the pool a lot.
Correct.
Right. So that burns up a lot of your time, huh?
Yeah. And what's funny is those first 2 or 3 weeks, you don't swim a lot when you get to college. Like, you don't get into your sport until like third, fourth week. So what was the norm hadn't really started yet. And then the moment that kind of took over, things started to fall into place.
You wrote about, you always felt that you had 1/3 of the talent as your competitors and you had to work 3 times as hard. Right. I don't see how swimmers the swimmer's life, the collegiate swimmer's life is just unbelievable. I mean, the amount that they work, and I guess you've listened to Rich Roll podcast, and I read a couple of his books, and you get a little bit of an insight to what that looks like. But I suspect your training was not far off from that, but it's grueling. I don't know that there's any other sport like it.
I don't. Again, I've met just about everybody from every walk of sport at this point, and I always, when people ask me like, "Hey, what was it like to swim?" I'm like, "It was unforgiving." That's the word I go with every single time, because you're presented choices constantly, and the right choice, sadly, is always do more.
So, what was your collegiate career like?
It was good. I would be lying if I said I didn't achieve. That I achieved everything. I fell short on one or two goals. But in terms of my actual experience, very fortunate to be surrounded by the right people at the right time in my career. I took myself very seriously when I first got into college, way too seriously. And I wasn't a serious person. Like, it's just not who I was. Right. And yet I came in highly touted, full scholarship, in a situation where it's like, well, they've clearly brought me in to score points and be great and win and all this kind of thing. So, show everybody that's who you are and that's what you're going to be for this team. And again, I consider myself very blessed through the first couple of months to have been introduced to the right guys at the right time who just brought me right back down to earth. Just be Steve, just be fun, just be playful. And, let your hard work do all the talking. You don't need to do any talking.
Yeah. But I could see where that would be elevated stress and you could get to burnout quicker too. But if you're just being yourself, that's a recipe for longevity in the sport.
Yeah, 100%.
So when I started the research for you, I was Googling Steve Mellor, and I saw this guy, but the ages, the times didn't line up. This guy was older than you. I was like, well, is that Steve's father? But what was going on there?
Yeah, it was the theme of my swimming career from like the age of 12 till 16 because of the region I was from. There was a guy, exact same name, same spelling, the whole thing. And he was about 12 to 14 years, I think, my senior. And he'd been to the 1992 Barcelona Olympic Games. And so to put that into perspective, he was in 1992, he was the same age that I was when I came to the US in 2005, so there's a good 13-year age gap. And he was on the tail end of his career right as I was taking off. And believe it or not, at some of these regional competitions in the northwest of England, we were finalists, first and second seed into the final. It was literally lane 4, Steve Mellor, lane 5, Steve Mellor. And it was and that was the case for like 2 or 3 years. And it was great because it was actually like a passing of the baton. We were actually even the same events. He was a backstroke swimmer, I was a backstroke swimmer. Like, it was ridiculous just the amount of commonalities. Kidding. Like, yeah.
That's amazing. So what were you most proud of in your collegiate swimming career? I mean, not necessarily wins or things like that, but when you look back on that time, what do you take away?
To your point from what I wrote in the book, I really believed that I had a third of the talent, and I'm sure people could give me an abundance of evidence as to why that's not true, but I had to think that way. So for me to continually tell myself I had a third of the talent and preach that I would have 3 times the work ethic, that is what I was most proud of, is that I feel I maximized every ounce of God-given ability that I had in that sport, to the point of where my last race, I threw my arm into the wall. I broke the NC State school record in the 200 backstroke, 200-yard backstroke in that last swim. And I'd been swimming with a torn rotator cuff for almost 2 years at that point because my body was just done. It was absolutely done. And I literally just hopped in the pool, did that 200 backstroke, and said, this is it. This is the last 200 yards you're ever going to swim, and you won't leave an ounce of anything.
Yeah.
You won't leave an ounce of anything outside of this pool. You will be all in this pool when you're done. And I almost left my left arm in there too. So.
Man, that's fantastic.
Yeah.
When you look back and you feel like you took full advantage of an opportunity.
Yeah. No regrets at all. No.
That's fantastic. So you started your coaching career shortly thereafter. I mean, upon graduation, you got your master's from North Carolina State.
Yeah, correct. I went straight into my master's degree after graduating with my undergrad in 2009, and I was a graduate assistant there. Again, more scholarship, which was great, and didn't even consider coaching at all until it was just in front of me, until I was doing it. And the moment I was doing it, it almost seemed too obvious not to do, and really start taking more seriously. So it was something I moved into very naturally, very quickly.
And you started your coaching career at
North Carolina State. When I was doing my master's degree, I spent 2 years as a graduate assistant coach. Had a ton of autonomy through the summer times. Actually, when there wasn't college swimming going on, I had the option: do I want to take ownership of certain things in the summer or not? And actually would take full ownership of things as opposed to just being slightly involved. I took full ownership, and yeah, before I knew it, I was coaching year round. So,
and then you ended up at LSU.
Yeah.
Shortly thereafter?
Yeah, it was actually before I even graduated. I applied and was offered a job here in Baton Rouge. And it was one of those wonderful moments where I didn't even know how many people I had in common with the head coach at the time until I actually applied for the job and started asking around. I was like, wow, I've got like 8 people that can reach out to this dude and say, hey, Steve Mellor's all right. You might want to consider him. And he even jokes to this day, he's like, man, you're kind of a pain in the butt when you apply for that job. People wouldn't leave me alone. I was getting phone calls like every 5 minutes about you, man.
This podcast is sponsored by NAI Ladder & Blum, Louisiana's leading commercial real estate firm, offering expertise in every discipline, including office, industrial, retail, multifamily, and corporate services. Their agents guide you through the real estate process from start to finish, using a host of marketing, prospecting, and analytical technologies. As leading entrepreneurs, your valuable time and resources should align with the most trusted name in commercial real estate, NAI Ladder & Blum. Learn how they can work for you at www.ladderblum.com. TurnKey Solutions is a nationwide cybersecurity and IT systems expert, providing the services that growing businesses need to stay ahead of hackers, hurricanes, and IT nightmares. With 24/7 support teams and offices across Louisiana and Texas, they bring peace of mind to companies of all sizes. Their 5-star rated team provides lightning-fast IT support with the cybersecurity and business continuity solutions today's businesses demand. When you're looking for a technology partner to provide you with peace of mind, find out more by calling them at 225-224-6594 or chat with them online at www.tks.la/NXT. So I was reading in your book, in your first year at LSU, you really had an impactful year. You felt like all your athletes were buying into your program and you were really making quite an impact. But then something came up and you had to get your visa renewed, and tell us that story.
Yeah, I learned a hard lesson that year, not to put too much faith in people that may or may not be educated to take care of something for you.
In international processes.
International processes, let's put it that way. And but yeah, to your point, it was a really successful first year. And for me, I was just left completely high and dry in a situation where I'd been on a 1-year visa as a former student. You get 1 year to work in the United States, and then you can immediately move into a working visa. And It should have been pretty straightforward, but for whatever reason, things didn't get done. And before I knew it, I was finding out in July of 2012 that my visa was not going to be renewed, and I had about 2 weeks to up on out of here and head back across the Atlantic.
Oh, my goodness.
And for me, that was where the beginning of the end of that initial chapter of my life kind of began. You know, things got pretty bad pretty quick. So
yeah, you talked about going back to England and finding yourself back in your childhood home, and you really didn't like the guy you were with, which was yourself.
Right.
And it sounded like a tough time, right?
Yeah.
But it didn't get resolved. You didn't get the visa. And then you had to come back to the U.S., right?
Yeah.
And sell all your stuff.
Right.
For pennies on the dollar.
And here's the thing. I didn't plan for any of this. So, a year out of college, I didn't have a huge amount of savings. I wasn't in a place where I could just start over wherever, doing whatever. For me, when I had that crystallizing moment back in England that we were done in Louisiana, this wasn't going to happen. I flew back over and sold my entire apartment on my boss's driveway, and just sat there at one point. I'll never forget the moment in my life. Such a defining moment. Sat top of his driveway. He and his wife went out to go do something, and I just sat there on my old boss's driveway with my entire apartment just staring back at me. And I'm like, what has happened? Like, how did we get here?
And you're selling everything you have on the
everything. Because I need the money,
Right.
first and foremost. Secondly, I need to get rid of it, so I'll take anything for it. And thirdly, I'm heading back to England for I don't even know what.
Yeah.
All just question marks. No answers, just questions.
God,
So
the stress.
significant amount of stress.
So you ended up back in England in a completely different career.
Yeah. Very different career.
And recruitment.
Recruitment, specifically in the mining industry.
How in the world?
Right. It's the complete opposite of swim
Yeah.
coaching, right?
Yeah.
I think if there were such a thing. And I looked at my resume. I'm like, one thing I did do was recruit. So there's no collegiate swimming in the UK. So let's get into recruiting.
Yeah.
And the first place that said yes to me wanted me to recruit people in North America into the mining industry.
But you weren't a happy camper.
Not at all.
You did it for a number of years. You talk in your book. The first shock is shock the self, right? And throughout the book, you tell stories. Sometimes they're your stories. Sometimes they're the stories of others that you've interviewed in your podcast, and they're good. They're solid, and it makes it very, very interesting a read. This shock to self was your story, and part of that, it's my take on it, Steve, is that in order to start on your journey, that you define in your book about finding your motivation and maximizing your potential, is you have to love yourself. And what I found really interesting about that is during those 4 years of you in the mining recruitment industry, how could you get started from there and rebuild to maximize your potential when you weren't terribly in love with yourself at the time?
Yeah. Well, firstly, I had to stop what I was doing. I had to not work in that area and start to reestablish what was it about this life that I was creating in the US that was connecting with my best self, that was serving my best self. There was something there that was making me happy because I was happy, you know? And so for me, that process of hitting rock bottom, and I've talked about it with certain individuals at times just to kind of help them see that it's okay to hit rock bottom. I will disclose that information sometimes with people just to show that I can relate and truly understand what that moment can look like. For me to hit rock bottom and then have that realization that, listen, you have once loved who you are and what you do. Right now, you don't love who you are and you don't love what you do. It's probably going to take a while to figure out how to love yourself again, but you can fix not loving what you do right now. You can fix that right now.
Yeah.
And I did. Next day, boom. Sorry, I'm not doing this job anymore. It's time for me to find something that I can connect to, and I know at least have a chance of rediscovering my best self. And that was literally when I started that climb back to ending up in the United States in that moment.
Which meant you getting your visa.
I did it the right way that time.
Yeah.
I took control. And I laugh now, but in that moment, I had to ask for favors. It's an expensive process. So I was reaching out to friends and family and just saying, listen, this is what I need. And all I can do is promise you is you'll get it back eventually. I can't promise that I'll give it you back in a week or a month, but I can tell you you'll get it back. So I learned some really great lessons the first time around, and then I learned the types of friends and relationships that I had the second time around. Now, when
you got back to the U.S., did you go straight back to LSU?
I did, and that was the beauty of it, man.
That's fantastic.
It was like this is the beautiful. It was 2015, January 1st, literally New Year's Day. I hop on a plane, fly back to Baton Rouge. January 2nd, I wake up and I hop on a bus, and we're going to a swim meet, and it's like, man, it's like it didn't even happen. This little bump in the road didn't even happen. Now, it definitely did, and it took its toll. Yeah. But at the same time, I came back halfway through a season, so the season was happening. It was going, and so I just came in and just helped where I could help and did what I could do. I didn't interfere. I just was available to everybody. And it was, in many ways, it was actually the best way to come back. I didn't have time to even think. It was just like, hey, you're back in. Let's do this thing.
So from there, you went to have a long run at LSU. And walk us through some of the highlights of your collegiate coaching career.
Yeah. It was year in, year out. It was always a challenge. Coaching swimming specifically at LSU, mainly because as a program, we were in a place where we kind of knew where we were in the pecking order. So we did what we could do with the resources that we had. And what we could do is we could take kids that wanted to be great and make them great, and we didn't have the luxury of maybe selling them on facilities or certain other aspects that can come with SEC competitors. But if they came in with the right work ethic and the right mindset, we could do some great things. And I had a handful of SEC medalists and finalists, a couple of All-Americans. And then in 2019, I got to recruit this kid out of Atlanta, Georgia, called Brooks Curry, that no one else in the United States was recruiting. And he was my best kept secret. And I just knew what he was capable of doing.
Let us hear the Brooks Curry story, because it's a fundamental part of your story in the creation of your business and in your book, and it's a fantastic story.
Yeah, again, just as I was saying, he was just talent. He was just this big pile of talent, and he hadn't been doing the swimming thing very long. And I just knew, I was like, if you just come and work with me, I just know this can be great, but you just need to come here. And so that was kind of my pitch. It wasn't much more than that. And he knew I just believed in him. Right. And so we got to work in 2019. And by the end of his freshman year, we'd started to connect a few pieces together. I got to see just how raw his talent was in places, but also just how coachable he was in other places. And halfway through that freshman season, he told me, like, I want to win SECs. I want to be an SEC champion this year. I'm like, man, that's a tall order for a freshman, especially one that came in the way you came in. But hey, I hear you. Let's talk about it. Let's work through it. Lo and behold, February of 2020 rolls around, SEC champion, 100 freestyle.
Oh my gosh.
And that doesn't happen in the sport of swimming. So that was the first bang, so to speak. That was the first big pull of attention towards him, our program, myself even at that time. And then COVID hit, So there we are. NCAA championships is canceled. Olympic Games, Olympic trials is canceled. Everything's canceled. And most of his competitors at the time looked at that cancellation as like, what are we going to do? What are we going to do? And I saw that cancellation as, wow, we have another 12 months to do the unthinkable. We have an extra year to train towards something that we were even willing to even consider this year after just 1 year of him qualifying for an Olympic Games for the United States. But now we have an extra 12 months. Are you kidding me? This is almost easy now.
And so at what point did the two of you come up with this plan to shock the world?
We actually came up with it, believe it or not, in my office his first day on campus in 2019.
First day. He
came into my office. He had a pretty good summer. Certainly was nowhere near the standard that anyone would even fathom him going to Olympic Games the following summer, or as it turned out, the summer after. And he said, Coach, I think I want to try and make the Olympic team. And instead of looking at him and laughing and being like, man, are you crazy? I was just like, have you considered what that's going to take? And I tell people this all the time, Andrew. it was kind of irrelevant what he said back to me. The most important thing was that he actually had an answer. He'd considered it. And I was like, man, he's not just saying this. He's actually considering this. That's powerful to me. That means that he's actually taken the time before sitting down in my office and saying this. He's not just spur of the moment, hey, it'd be cool to do this, right? He's genuinely given it thought. And him having a response was enough for me to be all in. I'm like, if we pull this off, buddy, we might just shock the world. And that was when Shock the World was born, right there in the office.
So how much did that transfer responsibility to you when he expressed his goals? I mean, like now it seems like in order to make that happen, because of where he was in his swim career, it meant that it almost seems like you were going to have to go into overdrive to bring out all this potential. But that is what created everything behind the 9 steps behind the Shock the World.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. And I think that's the funny part about the book is at its core, it's Brooks' process. It's what took Brooks from being this raw talent to being an Olympic gold medalist. And while I don't necessarily acknowledge every single chapter of how Brooks evolved through each chapter, I talk about Brooks from time to time within the book. At its core, for what ended up becoming 2 years, that is what we were working on, was taking someone who was just this idea of an Olympic champion, is what he became, and turning him into that. And it's like, well, we start with the idea, we think about the process, but the question is going to become how accountable are we going to remain to the process? And my job was just continually reminding him what he'd committed to.
Yeah.
That was my job. It wasn't to make him do any of it. It was to simply listen. You told me, you sat on this chair. You said you wanted to, we both committed to shocking the world. And anytime I felt him just becoming slightly disengaged, listen, remember what we've committed to. You at any point you can tell me if you want out. He's like, I don't want out. I'm like, okay, then let's keep going.
Man, I love parts of the book. I'm just going to bring up parts of it,
Sure.
but that shocked the community around this.
Yeah.
And so the idea was to build a team that could help support him in that year, right? And the year off from the COVID delay. And, you know, it kind of reminded me, you said in the book, it seems kind of odd because it seemed a little selfish, you know, building this team of 13 swimmers that came and trained with him. But it reminded me of competitive cycling, where you have the domestiques that are supporting that one rider, and they do a tremendous amount of work to get that rider into the right position to win. And it seemed like that was that same type philosophy.
I love and I know you're a cyclist, so I love the analogy. You know, so for me, when I sat down with the entire program, all athletes, and said, listen, this is going to sound super selfish, guys, but we have a kid who's capable of doing what he's capable of doing. And he's also committed to doing it too. My question is, I joke about it in the book, is the Jerry Maguire quote, is like, who's coming with me? You know, who's coming with me?
Right.
And that seems kind of, there's going to be coaches out there who hear something like that, like, you crazy? I'm like, I'm asking you to come with us. That it's really important to hear that question for what it is. I'm asking you to come with us. We are going to do this as a group. We're going to move as a body. We're going to surround ourselves, not just Brooks. We're going to be surrounded in one another with an intention to elevate what we do and pursue a standard of what we do that is representative of an Olympic champion. Does that mean you all have to become Olympic champions? No. But can we hold ourselves accountable to that standard? If you want to do that, come join us. And we had about 17, 18 people initially. A couple of people got a taste and like, yeah, I'm out. But for the most part, like you said, we had this group of 13 that just said, we're all in. And the beauty was the standards were never higher. The commitment was never greater. And the enjoyment was off the charts.
Dude, I'm ready to join the team. That is awesome stuff, man. Okay, let's take it to Omaha, Nebraska. It was at the Olympic trials.
Yep.
and walk us through that.
Just the craziest week and a half, because even though the competition for making the team in the 100 freestyle that Brooks made it in, it's only about a 48-hour period. You get there a few days before, you get acquainted, you get acclimated, you stay a few days after. And he, at that point, really believed he could do it. I believed he could do it. A couple of other people around the country were starting to hear rumors of what he was doing in practice, and they're like, can this kid actually do it? And lo and behold, prelims came around. He was the 4th fastest out of prelims, and now suddenly the attention is real. It's not just an idea anymore. It's a real thing that's happening and people can see. But there's semifinals at the Olympic trials, and it's the only competition in the United States where they have semifinals, where they don't just go straight from preliminaries to finals. He was beyond nervous for the semifinal because he knew at that point, if I get it wrong here, we don't even get the opportunity.
Done.
And his greatest gift, as great a swimmer as he is, his greatest gift is that of sleeping. He can fall asleep like that, and because he has this ability to switch off unlike I've ever seen from an athlete. And he didn't sleep that afternoon. He didn't sleep before semis. He couldn't get comfortable. But he got through with a less impressive performance. He got through 5th fastest into finals. And then came finals. And he was 2nd fastest at the turn. He shouldn't have been. He was going faster than he should have been at the time. People were catching him up towards the end. Then he found this little extra bit of effort in the last 15 meters. He reached for the wall, 3/100ths of a second between 4th and 5th. And he was on the right side of that 3/100ths of a second. And he made the Olympic team.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
Shortly thereafter is now people are coming to you, right? This is the first time that you had got an athlete into the Olympics, one of the athletes you had been training, coaching. And people are asking you, Steve, what is his, what's his training routine? What are you doing? And I found it interesting how you responded to that in the book. And you weren't talking about, well, we did, 1,600 meters of sprints and then this, anything of that stuff. You talked about his journey and Brooks as a person, which I felt was very defining for you as a coach. But at the same time, I think it sounded like you were going through a period where you're trying to figure out for yourself, where am I?
Yeah.
And explain what was going on in your mind at that time.
Well, it was super unusual circumstances because my boss at the time, the head coach of LSU, he'd been let go 3 weeks prior to the Olympic trials. And for me, as an assistant coach, you just don't know what's going on at that point. Am I going to be on the next staff? Do I need to start looking for a job? So enormous amounts of thought had been going on behind the scenes with or without the swimming involved. And Brooks makes the team. As you said, people start inundating me with firstly praise and secondly, like, tell me your secret. How did you do it? And all this kind of thing. And everything that I'm talking about is the person. Nothing about swimming. And they're like, I get it. Like he's this, but tell me about what you used to do in practice. I'm like, it's irrelevant. It's probably the same thing that you do. I just happen to coach things that you wouldn't find in a swimming textbook. Like I coach the kid that's in front of me. Yeah. And so for me, that was a huge awakening. And I think I write about it in the book, and I talk about it was this light bulb moment where for the first time in my life, by realizing I didn't have a lot in common with these peers of mine at the highest level of swimming in the United States, I realized I'd never been a swim coach. In fact, I was a coach of swimmers the whole time. The world of swimming was where I was coaching, but it wasn't who I was. Swim coach just didn't ever sit with me correctly. And so before I knew it, I was actually putting those pieces together of what does life look like beyond swim coaching. At the height of my career, at the top of the coaching mountain, I was having these realizations.
So, and so you were helping these swimmers find their potential, but they could have been in any of a number of fields, right? And you talk about your philosophy being meeting the person where they are, meeting your athlete where they are, what are their goals? Someone could have all the talent in the world, all the potential in the world, but if their mindset's not right and that's not their vision, you're not going to get them there, right? But I was intrigued. It was nice. It's nice to read something that's different in that way than, we got there at 4:30 and we swam for 3 hours, and this was a nutrition. It was more about the person. It always was, as you're saying.
Yeah.
So very interesting read. We would like to thank MBD Automation for their support of the Next Entrepreneur podcast. MBD Automation is a mechanical install contractor with a program-centric focus. So what do these guys do? They install conveyor systems, VRCs, platforms, singulators, sorters, and all sorts of other types of automated equipment. Who do they work for? They work for systems integrators, manufacturers, end users in fulfillment centers, airports, mail processing facilities, and projects in the defense industry. MBD Automation works for numerous Fortune 500 companies across the United States and has a list of international clients that they perform work for in the U.S. as well. If MBD Automation can help you on your next project, you can find them online at mbdautomation.com. This podcast is sponsored by Mayhall, Fondren Blaze, a Louisiana business litigation firm offering sophisticated legal advice that is tailored to meet the needs of their individual clients, including a wide variety of litigation, complex business negotiations, corporate formations, closings, and title examination. As leading entrepreneurs, your valuable time and resources should align with the expertise of MFB, a Louisiana practice made for business. Learn how we can work with you at www.mfbfirm.com. Could you or your business benefit from a comprehensive financial plan? Our sponsor, Centura Advisors, is a locally owned firm in Baton Rouge, Louisiana that specializes in personal and business financial planning, tax planning, corporate retirement plans, and investment management. We provide an all-in-one wealth management service so busy business owners like you can take back your valuable time. Visit www.centura-advisors.com to learn more. Centura Advisors, it's time to plan your future. So you walk away from coaching at that point and you're ready to start your business, right?
Yeah, correct.
But you didn't have business waiting for you in the wings, right? You're ready to start from scratch. So how did you do that?
So the only thing I had to I don't like using that term fall back on, because it was all assertive. The only thing I had at my disposal was my network that I created through the podcast. So the first thing I did was just let anyone and everyone I'd ever met through the podcast know this is what I'm doing.
So at that point, you had how many episodes under your belt?
120, something like that, maybe.
A lot.
Yeah, good amount.
Yeah. I think we're at about 105 right now.
Yeah.
So I can
catching me up though.
I can appreciate that's a lot of work. So in your book, you talk about your first customer, Bill Whittle.
Bill Whittle, Baton Rouge.
Yeah, Baton Rouge guy, and well known. Tell us, Bill was 72 years old when he came to see you. Now, you would think, if someone's coming to you to talk about potential, they're on the younger end of the scale.
Right.
And, but the story about Bill engaging you is pretty sweet.
It is. And so the full story is that I had a message from a guy that works within Primerica. Bill is responsible for as large a area of Primerica within the United States historically as you may ever find. And I had a guy in Primerica reach out to me, and I knew enough about Primerica. I was like, you're reaching out to me to pitch me. I know what you're doing, but you're too late, buddy. I've already started my own business.
Yeah.
However, I didn't have a lot of meetings at that time. I was pretty free. I just started a business. So I took the meeting. I went to the Primerica offices here in town, And I sat down with this guy, and within about a minute and a half, I knew, all right, listen, you're not who I need to be talking to. I knew that right away. Now, however, divine intervention played a part. And right at that moment, Bill walks into this office and says, who's this guy? Just comes in. I'm like, look at Bill. I'm like, immediately, I'm like, this is the guy that's in charge. It's like in my mind, everything went off right away. Yeah. This is the guy that's in charge. So Bill gave me the whole sales pitch, the full Primerica thing. And I sat there and I took it and I absorbed it. And I said, listen, this is who I am and this is what I'm about.
He's really trying to bring you in.
100%. He wants me to be an agent. He wants me to be an agent with Primerica. And, he sells me on and let's get lunch. So we got lunch and I let him continue his pitch at lunch. And then I moved across the table some one sheets that I was starting to put together for my business and said, listen, this is who I am and this is what I'll do. And then we met a third time and I said to him this. I said, listen, I will get my life insurance license. I'll do that. I'll entertain this whole thing that you're presenting. If you start working with me as my first client, and what I want to see, and I want to hear from you in a couple months from now, if you can tell me that I'm more used to you as an agent as I am as your coach, then I will be an agent.
God.
He never brought it up again.
No kid.
He never brought it up again. And a year later, he's renewed. We continue to work together to this day.
So, what can you do for a guy at that point in his career?
Well, as I talk about in the book, the one thing I had such high admiration for was that Bill wanted to be relevant. He's 72 years old. He's training guys that are 50 years younger than him.
Yeah.
And he wants to know, how can I do this still effectively to this day? And that's not easy, but the admiration I have for someone who just says, you know what? I know my flaws. I know we're generations apart, but I still want to be relevant and help coach me to that relevance.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love that. What a great story. So in your book, you talk about 9 steps that you've created, and they're in 3 phases. And as I mentioned, the stories that you lace through each chapter of the 9 steps, it brings it to light because it's real life stories and people. Benjamin Alexander. So these are guys that you would have had on your podcast.
Correct.
Right?
Yep.
So he was a DJ.
Yep.
But he determined that he wanted to become Jamaica's first Olympic downhill alpine skier.
Right. I joke before about the spectrum of swim coach and, recruiting in the mining industry, but that's a pretty big spectrum right there.
Yeah. That is something. But what a fantastic story that one was. Allison Hayden, far more emotional. Benjamin Alexander, it's just saying that sentence is fun. Because we remember that Jamaican bobsled team.
That's it,
right?
right.
But he wanted to become the alpine, downhill alpine skier. So that's just a fun story. Allison Hayden is far more emotional. She came on your podcast. Right, and then started her own podcast.
That's right.
And as a cancer victim, and then she started to talk to some real important players in the world.
And honestly, like that, as I say it in the book, if there's any episode of my podcast that you get inspired or motivated to go listen to across all 160 something episodes I now have, it's, I want to say episode 48. I think I remember that rightly, of me and Allison. And the beauty of that too was that I was doing this Women Changing the World series. I did like this 10-part series. And around like the 2nd or the 3rd episode, Allison reached out to me and I'd already sort of had this list of 10 women. And I'm like, Allison, your story, like you're in this thing. Like I'm going to make it 11. It's weird that it's 11, but whatever, we're going to do 11. And, so she came on and she talked about her whole background. And the crazy part about it was that day, before we even started recording, she'd found out that she'd been diagnosed with a form of cancer that was sadly going to be the end of her.
It's terminal.
And she went through the whole interview without acknowledging it once. And that's why I tell people to go listen to it, because listen to it knowing that someone knew that, had been informed of that. And she was still speaking the way she was speaking in that episode. I will never forget it. I only spoke with her twice more before she sadly passed away. I'll never forget her. I'll never forget that moment I had with her.
Yeah, that was emotional just to read about. But you talk about how you think about her, so frequently.
So frequently. And fortunately, I was able to reach out to her partner after I wrote the book and get a copy of the book and to her partner, which meant the world to me to be able to do that, just to even acknowledge her in any capacity that I could, in her memory.
Writing the book.
Yeah.
You started that within 6 months of starting your business.
Right.
And so, what was that process like? Every person that I've had on the podcast that authored a book talks about it as a surprisingly challenging and far more difficult process than they would have imagined starting out. What was it like for you?
The most difficult part for me was actually the editing process, because everything that I alluded to earlier about my childhood of playing and dreaming and imagine, I should have been paying way more attention in English class during that time than I was. So I get all these crosses out and circles after I actually write the thing. But what's funny is that the book kind of just flew out of me. Like, it really did. Yeah. It was as if I just had all this information and I was like, I got to do something with this information. And I had two approaches that I took. One was waking up before the sun would rise and just writing without even looking at what I wrote for about an hour straight. I did that for a few weeks. And then I had these at-home writing retreats where I would tell my wife, listen, you and the two kids, maybe see if mother-in-law's available. And for these 48 hours from Friday through Sunday, I am unavailable. I'm going upstairs and I'm writing and I'm writing and I'm writing. And that's all I'm doing for 48 hours. And I actually wrote the core of my book in about 4 months. Like, I just got it out of me. And once it was out of me, like I said, then the editing process began, and I was very aware quickly of just how bad I was grammatically and all these sort of things I just was never paying attention to in school. So
yeah, I was, when you take a book that's well organized and that well structured, and I mentioned the 9 steps and the 3 phases and the process, like refining that and making it real and making it understandable and relatable seemed to be a lot of work.
It was. And what I actually really like about it, Andrew, is that, here I am now looking at what I do with clients today, and even looking back at how I used to coach swimming too, is it was the same approach that I would take. Let's get it all on the table. Let's get everything on the table that we need to know about what we're about to take on. And then let's make this process what it needs to be a successful one.
Yeah, I liked how you in your chapter about shock the habit. Well, you had to use that, and that's where you created the habits of getting up and writing every morning and things like that. I loved the story about Lex Gillette, a 2-time Paralympic silver medalist in the long jump who was blind. Mm-hmm. And that's in the chapter about shocking the truth. And you just read about that and the story about the mother's support and understanding of the truth. Man, I mean, some fantastic, like, where can you read about those stories? Where do you hear about that side of life?
Right.
So just an excellent job on that.
Thank you.
You did talk about the podcast, and it is a lot of work. I mean, so you break down all the parts and pieces. You've got to recruit people. You got to schedule them. You got to actually do the research and the podcast and the editing, and then the getting the stories out there. How have you been able to do all that? Do you have a support there?
I don't yet. I have a lot of podcast envy just with your setup here. I'll be honest with you. For me, I've made it, as you were alluding to there. It's very habitual now. Like, I have a system that I do it. It is in a position right now where I have a decision to make about just how far I want to take it, and I'm probably going to make that decision here in the next couple of months in terms of adding the support system that I do need to take it to that next level. But for me, the one thing I take pride in is that every time I put an episode out there, I put it out there as if it's going to be heard by 10 million people. even if it's only heard by 10,
Right.
My listenership is bigger than that. But, you know, for me, I've had that approach from day one. It's like, I'm going to assume that this is the one, this is the episode that's going to get caught up by the whole world, you know? And so I take pride in that. And, you know, if people listen to it the whole way through or just parts of it, I like to think that it's going to have that type of impact.
Yeah.
So.
Of course, that doesn't surprise me.
Right.
Because you're thinking about the potential of that episode, right?
That's it.
Yeah. So you talked about reaching out to your podcast guests as you started your business. Has that been a source of business growth for you?
It has, in a way. But you know what's been really exciting for me, and I think this will speak to you as someone that's lived in the area for so long. And what I really love just about so many of your past guests, I think this will speak to, is I'm sure they can all relate to this concept of when you have this idea for a business, you get a lot of people that want to interject with their opinion at first and say, well, that's an interesting idea, man. Have you thought about this? Have you thought about this? And everyone I went to, here I am proposing this theme of personal development, really. At the heart of my business is personal development. And everyone turned around. You want to do that in Baton Rouge, Louisiana? Everyone. I lost count through the first month of telling people this is what I was doing. And all I heard was challenge accepted. That's all my brain computed. Wow. Challenge accepted. And this is where Baton Rouge has proven me right in such a wonderful way, is that in the first year, as much as I went to that network within my podcasting background, which is filled with people around the world,
yes,
I suddenly started to connect dots here, right here in Baton Rouge.
Isn't that interesting?
And suddenly business owners, executives, turns out they are curious of how they can level up who they are, what they do, et cetera, et cetera. But the only way you're ever going to find that information out is by getting in front of them and having the conversation in the first place. And I've just been living that through the first year of my business is, how do I just keep getting in the room? Just keep getting in the room, keep talking to people about what it means to bet on yourself, to invest in yourself, and be curious enough to find out where it might go. And before you know it, people are super interested in that process because there's no better return than a personal return. That's the best return in life.
You know, we have talked to entrepreneurs over the last 3 years who've been in business for 20, 30, 40, 50 years. And some of them have had fantastic success. Some of them have been able to exit their businesses successfully. You're on the start of the process. But I can't imagine you being in a better position just from the way that you think, just the way that you're wired, because you hear challenge accepted and you're ready to go. So when you look, I'm not sure this is a fair question to ask someone this new to business, but when you look out, you know, a number of years down the road, what is it that you're excited about, and what potential do you see for your business?
I see the potential. I'll take the second part. Like the potential to expand is really exciting to me. Like, because for me, personal growth, personal development is so broad and wide. It can be health related, it can be professionally related, it can be personally related, relationships, culture. There's so many components to it, and it just so happens I'm super curious and interested in all of it. And that's one of the first things that people said to me is like, well, you got to have a niche. You got to have a niche. And I'm like, can just realizing potential be my niche? Can that be it? And can I just kind of approach things broadly with that niche in mind, so to speak? Yeah. And because with my clients, you know this, like any day, a challenge can come up to any business owner, any executive that is completely different than the challenge that they faced the day before. One of them can be very professionally based. And then suddenly there's this whole personal situation that they're having to deal with. It's still a challenge. It's still an adversity. It's still something they've got to overcome. And with that, they're learning more about themselves every time they encounter one of these adversities. So who am I to go into an executive coaching agreement and say, this is going to be strictly business? That's not fair. Right. And it's also not leaving me open-minded to the fact that I'm working with a human being, for crying out loud. You know, this is a human being that has so many dynamics to who it is they are and what makes who they are. I need to be respectful to all of it. Yeah. So I'm excited about the notion that Career Competitor LLC while it's just Steve Mellor and Co. right now. And, I say and Co. Co stands for my cat at home. That's just, that's my staff. That was my Christmas party this last year. So for me right now, I look at where I am and think 5 years, 10 years from now, what does my health coaching part of my business look like? What does my relationship part of my business look like? What does my culture part of my business look like? And hopefully, how do I stay involved in all of it? But more importantly, how do I oversee all of it?
It feels very holistic.
Yes.
And I think there are times where if you think of a motivation coach or a life coach, but particularly for business, that it's kind of the hype, the big, but that's not the feel that I get from any part of when I've researched you and read your book, and that's very refreshing. So
I appreciate that.
Look, continued success in all that you do. It is truly an honor to talk with someone as accomplished in so many different ways as you are, and I really appreciate that. So thank you for coming on.
Thank you for having me, Andrew.
Yes, sir. And that is why I love to do this podcast. Steve's stories just blew my mind. Growing up in this idyllic childhood in England, then making it to the U.S. on scholarship, coaching at LSU, and then yanked back across seas because of visa issues, working in a career that just sucked the life out of him for 4 years, but realizing he had to change. And he did, and he ends up at LSU and goes on to a storied career there, but he knew he had to make a change, and he did that, and that's how he started his business. If you read his book, it reads different than any other book like that I've ever read before. He laces real-life stories throughout, and makes it very relatable. So I encourage everyone to pick up that book, Shock the World by Steve Mellor. We appreciate Steve coming in. We appreciate you guys watching, and we'll catch you next time. We would like to thank our title sponsor, B1 Bank. They can be found online at b1bank.com. The Next Entrepreneur is produced by Propel Productions. You can find more information at propelyourstory.com. Don't forget to subscribe to the Next Entrepreneur podcast and hit the bell for notifications. You can also follow us on social media. The links are in the description below.